Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eirik and today we are going to cover a system of observation that I use to ensure I always observe on equal terms and don't chase my sculptures around in circles, never progressing. It's called the Planar System, a method of observation. This is yet another concept. I've talked about several other concepts before, but this is yet another one that I use while I sculpt that helps me make sculpting a little bit easier. First off, I do need to mention that I didn't come up with this method. Far from it. I got this from my teacher, Robert Bodem. He taught me this method while I was studying under him at the Florence Academy of Art, where I now teach. It's something all the students going through the program use. We all use this method and we all learn this method. And it's actually one of the earlier things we try to teach our students, how to observe the subjects we are trying to represent. Even though it tends to take a little bit of time, we want to move on as early as possible in the program from talking about how a student made this angle wrong, move this a little bit over, fix this little angle a millimeter here. We want to move on from these types of conversations as early as possible to something that the students can actually take with them and use after school. And so we do that by making sure the students can correct themselves. And this begins with observation, and it starts with observing on equal terms. I've talked a lot about the box in previous videos. If you watched any of my videos, you've definitely heard about the box before. The box is important. It's my original decision. It's the first truth I put down, and I use it to build everything else upon. I always start with the box. The box represents the pelvis. Without anything being right, sculpting becomes very difficult. There's nothing to relate to. So I make the box the first right thing that I make on my sculpture so that I have something to rely upon, something to reference back to, and something to relate every other decision to when progressing further into the sculpture. I also use the concept of the box to help me orient my model on the model stand. And orienting my model is the first step in observing on equal terms. So, let me show you how I use the planar system. I have recruited some friends, Thelonious and Sandeep, to help me make this video. Links to their social media is below, you should check them out, they're two of my students. Great people, great guys. Right now we're watching Sandeep from above. Me and Thelonious are holding the camera in a kind of awkward position, but we managed. And Sandeep is standing on the typical model stand that we use here at the Academy and that I use in my own studio, which is a square model stand with this round table that we can then rotate on. Now the square base is important for this method of observation. Now we had some discussions and Sandeep refused to be naked on YouTube, so you'll have to bear with us and imagine him being naked. Sandeep's pelvis, his box, is right now square or parallel to the front of the square model stand. And this is what we want. We use the two aces points, obvious on most models, to ensure that this is the case. If we simplify the pelvis into a box, which we do on our sculptures, the two aces points make up two of the corners directly across from each other. These 2 points should be square to our square model stand. From above, this becomes a little easier to see, but from the front, we can still see it, even though it's subtle and the differences might be difficult to catch. With training, it becomes easy to tell, or easier to tell, when the model's two aces points are square to the model stand. A quick word from our first and only sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online video learning platform where you can learn virtually anything, from baking to photography to painting. My viewers get a 2-month trial for free, so if you're interested in learning something new, click the Skillshare link in the description below and sign up. So just to reiterate, this is the correct way of observing, the way we are looking at our model right now. And this is the wrong way. This is the right way again. And this is the wrong way. Sandeep clearly has his pelvis not square to the model stand at this point. If we attempt to observe the contour from this view and we orient ourselves square to the model stand, we will not build the contour from the front, but from the 3/4 view. The problem with doing it this way is that it's extremely hard to get back to this view. There's nothing to relate to the square model stand to ensure that we always get back to the same viewing point. But making sure the two aces points are square to the front of the model stand, that's pretty easy, and we can always get back to this view. And frankly, for the most part, 4 views are really all you need for 90% of sculpture, which is why the model stand is square. It helps us orient ourselves and orient our models. Here you can see from the front, right now our model's pelvis, also known as the box, is square to the model stand, and this means that we can sculpt. And here he's not square to the model stand. And in this position, we cannot sculpt. Again, you can imagine him naked just to make the video a little bit more interesting. This, I think, is a good time to mention Patreon. If you are interested in learning sculpture from me personally and get feedback on your work either on email or by video chat, Patreon is the place for you. You'll get in-depth feedback on techniques and how you can apply them to your own work. Anything sculpture related goes. We can talk about armature, supplies, mold making, anything you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. So check it out, there's a link in the description below. So, orienting our model is obviously not enough. We have to orient our sculpture to match our model. Keeping our model stands square and the stand our sculpture sits on square simplifies this and makes it easy. Right here, our model is oriented correctly, pelvis square to the model stand, which we've talked about. And he has taken an interesting pose as well, which is always fun. But the problem here is that my sculpture stand is not square to where I am observing from. Now, how can I tell? I can tell because one side of the sculpture stand is exposed. I'm not looking directly at the front of my sculpture stand. I'm looking almost 3/4, close to 3/4. And here's how it's supposed to look. This looks better. It was a bit tricky to get the camera in the right spot, but as you can probably see, we can now see no side of the model stand and no sides on our sculpture stand. It's very important to point out that the perspective is only eliminated like this from this one spot, a set distance from the model and sculpture. So if I get any closer to my sculpture, I reintroduce perspective into the equation. I'm only observing on equal terms from this very point in the room. So remember to always step back to observe and set up your sculpture so that you eliminate perspective and can observe at the correct distance. Now, what is the correct distance to observe from? Usually you want to step back about 3 times the height of your model. Now, according to Leonardo da Vinci, and who am I to question him, observing something from a distance 3 times the height of the subject or object you are observing eliminates perspective distortion. Meaning that from 3 times the height of your model or your object, whatever it is you're observing, you are observing the model correctly with all the proportions represented visually without or with as little distortion as possible. When the model gets on the podium, their pelvis is very rarely square to the front of the model stand. And so we have to rotate a little bit. And it's very hard to judge how much you need to rotate when you're observing it something flat. So it's a lot easier if you observe from below or above. It's a lot easier to see how much something is turned when you're observing from below or above. So to turn the model at the beginning of a session, I get down in front of the model stand and I look up at the model's aces points. And I rotate so the model's aces points are square to the front of the model stand, as I just talked about. Professional courtesy applies here. You always let your model know that you're going to rotate so they don't lose their balance. And you, of course, only rotate from the front so that they can see you. Now the model is alive and she or he will move because the model is alive and people who are alive tend to move. So once a session, maybe in the middle of a session, I correct the model stand, making sure that the pelvis is square to the front again. there's one last thing to cover. With our model oriented, our sculpture stand oriented, it's essentially time to start sculpting. And this is where beginners tend to lose track a bit, because there's a lot to pay attention to so far. And there's still, as I just said, one more thing that we need to get right in order to help us maintain observation on equal terms as we progress through the process. Now, we've oriented our sculpture stand and we've oriented our model, but we also need to orient our sculpture so that they match our model, meaning that our sculpture needs to be square to our sculpture stand just as the model is square to the model stand. The model's pelvis has been oriented square to the model stand, and so it stands to reason that our box, which is our sculpture's pelvis, needs to be sculpted so that it's square to the front of the sculpture stand as well. And if we do this and we're able to maintain it, it means by simply adjusting the model and the sculpture stand like I just showed, we will be able to observe on equal terms even when the box on our sculpture disappears under flesh. The first decision made on our sculpture, which is the box, should be oriented correctly, square to the sculpture stand. And with that done, we can make decisions with confidence in what our four views are and how we go about observing from them. Now, it needs to be said that sculpting or observing in other ways might very well lead to good results as well. I have departed from this method somewhat because I've sculpted seated figures, and seated figures, you don't really have a square model stand all the time, which makes life a little bit difficult. But this is not really something that you would start out with, and so with a little bit of experience, you can ensure that your sculpture's box matches your model's pelvis. The planar system is really as close as I've come, at least, to learning or discovering a bulletproof method that ensures that nothing on our sculpture ends up crooked or weird. A sculpture with a pelvis that hasn't been set up well is prone to having one side be wider than the other, which I'm pretty sure is a serious medical condition we want to avoid. Using the planar system, we ensure that the front and the back plane and the side planes of our pelvis or box is parallel to each other. The planar system is the best way to create a figure that has good structure, making sure the figure appears solid and real. That's it for this week's episode. Next week, I believe we'll finally finish the sculpting series on the Empyrean sculpture you're seeing right here. The series is called PT, which is a bit confusing, I know, but eventually I'll change the name on those videos. I hadn't come up with the name Empyrean when I started the series, that came later, and so I know, I'm sorry, it's a bit confusing. Anyway, he's been done for months now, and I've been plugging away at the mold, which I actually finished today. I'll make some videos about that process as well, and you see those coming out throughout the summer. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, I encourage you to check out my Patreon page. I give feedback and critique on people's work, and we talk about whatever you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. So check it out, there's a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for a new video next Thursday. Subscribe and hit the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and share with your friends and family. It helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.